In 2019, following the settlement of a class action lawsuit against the Auburn Main Jail in Auburn, California, a video was released which showed a harrowing assault on a mentally ill inmate. On May the 14th of 2017, Beau Bangert, a diagnosed schizophrenic, was placed under watch out of concerns that he'd become a danger to himself. The man, who was held on minor drug charges, at one point began repeatedly slamming the door of his cell, which reportedly annoyed deputies. Surveillance video showed him laughing and adopting a fighting stance before a Placer County officer rushed him with a body shield and slammed him into a wall. The officer in question, identified as Robert Madden, then placed Bangert in a chokehold as 3 female officers pulled on his limbs in an attempt to wrestle him to the floor. The mentally ill inmate didn't fight back but remained upright and refused to go down. Madden then began punching him in the face and the back of the head. He pushed Bangert into the wall and struck him in the head with his elbow multiple times before landing further powerful punches. Bangert remained standing in spite of the repeated forceful blows, and Madden struck him in the midsection with his knee. More officers entered the cell and kicked the inmate in addition to deploying a taser on him. As the officers mobbed the man, they were able to take him down. They immobilized Bangert and placed a spit hood over his head but didn't immediately provide medical attention for him, leaving him on the floor of the small cell. They then restrained Bangert in a safety chair and 2 officers re-entered the cell to remove his hood. One held a plastic shield in front of the battered inmate, while another appeared to record his bleeding face with a camera. In the incident's wake, Deputy Madden, along with Deputy Jeffrey Villanueva and Sergeant Megan Yaws, were fired. The latter faced the charge of filing a false report, but the case was ultimately dismissed. Madden and Villanueva pleaded no contest to assault by a public officer in June of 2018. Bangert became the leading representative in the class action lawsuit, which, as reported by the Sacramento Bee, involved nearly 500 former inmates. A $1.4 million settlement was awarded, and the footage was made public by civil rights attorney Mark Merrin. The latter said of the officers involved in the incident, "They demonstrated total insensitivity, and it was clearly an abusive gang attack on a defenseless individual. It showed absence of training and malevolence." Bangert received around $50,000 from the class action suit, as well as $250,000 from a civil case settlement. Number 7. Tory Lanez. Canadian rapper Daystar Shamel Shua Peterson, professionally known as Tory Lanez, was convicted of assault with a semi-automatic firearm, keeping a loaded and unregistered firearm in a vehicle and discharging the firearm with gross negligence in December of 2022. The charges stemmed from a highly mediatized incident in which the Grammy-nominated artist shot his ex-girlfriend and fellow rapper Megan Jovan Ruth Pete, better known as Megan Thee Stallion. The shooting happened on July the 12th of 2020 in the Hollywood Hills, after the couple left the party at the home of socialite Kylie Jenner. Peterson was initially arrested for carrying a concealed weapon, and Pete had a foot wound which at first was believed to have been caused by shattered glass. The woman subsequently took to social media to reveal that she'd been shot in the foot and later on named Peterson as the shooter. They went back and forth on social media, with Peterson accusing his ex of trying to frame him and Pete maintaining that he was leading a smear campaign against her. Peterson was charged in connection to the incident, and during the legal proceedings that followed, Pete testified that he shot at her feet and yelled at her to dance as she was getting out of an SUV. The woman reported that she had to undergo surgery to remove bullet fragments from her feet. In August of 2023, Peterson received a 10-year sentence in Los Angeles Superior Court. His Instagram remained active during his incarceration, and in May of 2025 he shared a photo that appeared to have been taken behind bars. About a week after the picture was uploaded, on May the 12th, Peterson was nearly killed during a prison stabbing. The incident, which took place at the California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi, was captured on CCTV. The 39-second clip showed Peterson stepping out of his cell and pausing near a staircase before he was ambushed, knifed, and taken to the ground. He writhed and kicked out, yelling, "Oh God," while his attacker, subsequently identified as 42-year-old Santino Casio, landed knife strikes from above. Peterson eventually managed to run away and fled down the stairs. A surveillance photo showed him walking down a corridor shirtless while covered in blood and bearing a shocked expression. Prison staff intervened and he was rushed to a hospital. A social media post revealed that the artist had been stabbed 14 times, including 7 times to the back, with the remaining blows landing on his torso, back of the head and side of the face. Both his lungs collapsed as a result, and he was placed on a breathing apparatus. As of the latest updates on the case, he was talking normally and was set to recover from the attack. Safety concerns resulted in him being transferred to the California men's colony. Casio was placed in restrictive housing while the investigation was underway. The motive behind the attack wasn't immediately revealed. Casio had been incarcerated at the Tehachapi institution since February of 2004 and was serving a sentence of life with parole after being convicted of second-degree murder, first-degree attempted murder, personal use of a dangerous or deadly weapon, and inflicting great bodily injury. He received 6 years to his sentence in 2008 for assaulting a prisoner with a deadly weapon, and a further 2 years in 2018 for possessing a deadly weapon. Number 6. Lashawn Thompson. On June the 12th of 2022, Lashawn Thompson was arrested for simple battery in Atlanta, Georgia. After the authorities determined that he had mental health issues, he was transferred to the psychiatric wing of the Fulton County Jail. Roughly 3 months later, in September, he was found dead in horrid conditions. The cell he was in was not fit for a diseased animal. This is inexcusable and is deplorable. An attorney for Thompson's family told a media outlet the 35-year-old, who hadn't been convicted and was awaiting trial, was living in squalor in a small cell. A detention officer was reportedly so freaked out by the scene that they wouldn't administer CPR. Thompson's emaciated body was riddled with insect bites, many of which stemmed from bedbugs and lice. The Fulton County medical examiner listed his cause of death as undetermined, but an independent medical review concluded that it was homicide by neglect. Thompson succumbed to cardiac arrhythmia from a combination of dehydration, malnutrition, and severe body insect infestation. He was suffering from schizophrenia and hadn't been receiving proper treatment for the condition, as evident from a lack of medication in his system and the absence of medical records from more than half of the time he spent behind bars. Thompson's family accused the detention officers and medical staff of standing idly by while the man starved and was eaten alive by insects. They literally watched his health decline until he died. A statement from the family read, "The Southern Center for Human Rights had previously noted multiple outbreaks of scabies and lice at Fulton County Jail, and the detention facility was described as dangerously understaffed and overcrowded." Updates on the case indicated that Thompson's family called for a criminal investigation into his passing, but the outcome of the case remained unclear. Number 5. Mahir Abdulrahman. In May of 2025, a troubling video was publicly released, and it showed 2 inmates housed at His Majesty's Prison, Fosse Way, in Leicestershire, England, moments before they beat a 3rd inmate to death. The incident happened on the morning of August the 20th of 2024, shortly after a prison officer had unlocked the cells and then continued with their rounds. 19-year-old Ashiri Smith and Thierry Robinson, aged 21, were recorded grinning widely as they crept into the cell of convicted molester Mahir Abdulrahman. The duo carried out a vicious attack in which they took Abdulrahman down and relentlessly stomped on his head and neck. They emerged from his cell 37 seconds later. A female officer subsequently found Abdulrahman unresponsive in his cell. He was in cardiac arrest when first responders reached the scene, and he died from a brain bleed within an hour of being assaulted. Leading up to the incident, Smith and Robinson had reportedly been terrorizing him for days, and he'd asked to be moved to a new cell. The day before the fatal attack, Abdulrahman, who was serving a 38-week sentence, had reportedly thrown hot water from a kettle at the duo, both of whom reportedly had gang ties. Smith was arrested in Birmingham in November of 2023 during a body cam recorded raid on his home. Officers approached his residence and gained access by smashing a window on the property's front door. They acted on reports that Smith, who was in his late teens at the time, was in possession of a loaded pistol. He'd filmed himself wearing a balaclava while pointing the gun around, and the authorities became aware of the videos. During the raid, officers found a Walther pistol loaded with 5 9mm bullets underneath his mattress. In another one of the incriminating videos, Smith was seen emptying bullets from the Walther towards the camera and displaying the weapon and ammunition on a mattress. Smith was jailed for 3 years in April of 2024 after admitting possession of a firearm and ammunition. The attack on Abdulrahman occurred roughly 4 months into his sentence. Smith was found guilty of murder and handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 17.5 years. Robinson, a drill rapper who performed as Trills, was cleared of murder but found guilty of manslaughter and jailed for 11 years. The killing of Abdulrahman starkly contrasted previous reports on HMP Fosse Way, which was considered to be England's most comfortable prison, with critics arguing it resembled a student hall, or a hotel rather than a detention facility. Inmates enjoyed a variety of amenities and features. They included personal computers, ping-pong tables, an artificial turf sports pitch and cell windows without bars, as well as a variety of workshops, a construction vehicle simulator and a music classroom, with lessons provided by record company representatives. Number 4. J. Allen Jones. In 2018, 3 officers from the Garner Correctional Institution in Newton, Connecticut, went to the cell of 32-year-old J. Allen Jones to perform an unprompted strip search. Jones told them that he was too tired to be searched, and then reportedly began chanting nonsensical words. He was suffering from schizophrenia, but the officers were reportedly unaware of that aspect. They interpreted his behavior as failure to comply and then proceeded to restrain him. Only still photos from the surveillance video of the ensuing altercation were released. Jones was pepper sprayed, stripped, bound, and he had a spit hood placed on his head. He was reportedly heard wheezing, coughing, and gasping for air in the video. A nurse gave him Benadryl, the anti-anxiety drug Ativan, and Haldol, an antipsychotic, to calm him down. 8 officers used their knees and palms to hold him down until Jones's final visible voluntary movement. Officers took the man out of his cell in a wheelchair and then asked for him to be medically checked. Nurses didn't perform life-saving measures or call an ambulance until 7 minutes after he'd become unresponsive. Jones was pronounced dead after he was taken to the hospital, and the cause was listed as sudden death during strangle and restraint with chest compression and pepper spray exposure in person with hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. At the time of his death, Jones was serving a 10-year sentence for charges that included first-degree robbery. His mother and girlfriend filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the 8 officers and the nurse involved in the incident, alleging that they'd used excessive force. An official investigation by the Department of Correction concluded that the use of force had been appropriate. A 350-page report noted that Lieutenant Gary Gray had tried to limit the physicality by stopping officers from holding Jones by the neck or putting their knees on his back. Gray also said that staff didn't know Jones was asthmatic when they used chemical spray on him. However, the report did find blame with the staff as they failed to recognize when Jones stopped resisting and was no longer able to stand on his own, as well as for allowing over 7 minutes to pass before performing CPR. In 2019, both the state and Jones's family members agreed to have the video sealed under a protective order, but as of March of 2025, advocates were pushing for the video to be made available to the public. Number 3. Mitchell Harrison. In October of 2011, Mitchell Harrison was serving an indefinite sentence at HM Prison Franklin in Durham, England, when he was brutally murdered by 2 fellow inmates. Harrison had been handed a sentence of at least 4.5 years that stemmed from him forcing himself on a teenage girl. Michael Parr and Nathan Mann were both serving life sentences at Franklin. The latter was set to spend a minimum of 24 years behind bars for the 2010 murder of 2 women, aged 56 and 72, at a nursing home in Leicestershire. He punched one victim to death and suffocated the other. Parr had been convicted of attempted murder in 2003. Following an attempt to smother a patient at a psychiatric hospital. Both men had murderous fantasies and bonded over their shared interest, with Parr stating at one point that he was excited to have found a like-minded individual in Mann. The latter warned prison staff at one point that he was going to kill someone, but he wasn't taken seriously. He would later be described as a classic, cold, callous, and homicidal psychopath. Parr had expressed similar twisted thoughts, telling a psychiatric nurse that he wanted to cut other inmates' heads off and eviscerate them. Mann and Parr decided to enact their deranged fantasies and reportedly targeted Mitchell because they didn't like him and thought he was arrogant. The duo intended to cut out his liver and consume it. On October the 1st of 2011, they lured him into Mann's cell and ambushed him. Parr held the victim down by his legs while Mann carried out the attack. He attempted to strangle Mitchell before stabbing him in the eye with a ballpoint pen, using a weapon made from plastic cutlery and razor blades. Mann cut deep into his neck. Mitchell's stomach was then sliced open, exposing his small intestine. But the attackers ultimately didn't go through with their plan of taking out his liver. Officers performing a cell check found Mitchell's disemboweled body on the bed. The killers promptly confessed, handing them both life sentences at Newcastle Crown Court. A judge described the incident as a murder of peculiar and unusual brutality. Mann pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and was given a minimum term of 16 years on top of his pre-existing sentence. Parr admitted murder and was jailed for a minimum of 32 years. The judge said during sentencing, "Because of the risk these prisoners pose, I cannot envisage the circumstances where either of them are ever released. They will face the fact that they may well end their lives in prison." Today's topic was requested by ScrappyDoo7887. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Tremaine Carroll. In the spring of 2024, transgender inmate Tremaine Carroll faced 2 counts of assault of an intimate nature as well as 1 count of dissuading a witness from testifying. The charges stemmed from attacks against women at the Central California Women's Facility. Madera County District Attorney Sally Moreno told the media that Carroll had abused California Law SB 132. The Transgender Respect, Agency and Dignity Act. It enabled transgender inmates to request to be housed in a manner consistent with their identity. To apply, an inmate only had to profess their identity, which Carroll did. Moreno emphasized that a person does not need to be on cross-gender hormones, they don't need to be signed up for transgender surgery, they don't need to have a psychological evaluation regarding gender confusion. The mere statement is enough. Speaking of Carroll, Moreno said, "This is a person who is not a woman in any sense of the word." Carroll used he, him pronouns and reportedly made no mention of a female gender identity until 3 months after the act passed in 2021. The inmate was serving 25 to life under the state's 3 strikes and you're out law, which applied harsher punishments for those with 3 felony convictions. Carroll's successive offending began in the late 1980s with theft and firearm possession. In the early 1990s, he kidnapped and abused 2 women by forcing them to perform oral copulation. After Carroll robbed a jewelry store in 1998, the 3 strikes law took effect. Following the transfer to the Central California Women's Facility, Carroll abused an inmate who was only identified as Rebecca. In January of 2024, she was serving a short burglary sentence when she was moved into a cell with Carroll. The latter immediately made advances towards her, which she turned down. When Rebecca was alone in the shower, Carroll subjected her to forced copulation. The victim reportedly screamed and cried throughout the ordeal. After the abuse was reported, 51-year-old Carroll, who stood at 6'2" and weighed roughly 200 pounds, tried to claim that Rebecca, who was a little over 5 feet tall, was the aggressor. Instead, Rebecca was initially treated as a suspect. She was subjected to medical examinations, which reportedly proved in the end that she was the victim. A second inmate also accused Carroll of abuse, but the details regarding that case remained unclear. As of the latest updates, Carroll denied all charges but was moved to Kern Valley State Prison, an all-male lockup. Stick around after the last chapter if you have not yet seen our video about when tough ladies go wrong. That's coming right up. Number 1. Joanna Dennehy. Leading up to the summer of 2025, Joanna Dennehy became known as Britain's most dangerous female inmate. As of June of 2025, she was considered such a threat to staff and inmates that she was often held in total isolation. In March of 2013, Dennehy stabbed 3 men to death and buried them in ditches outside Peterborough in Cambridgeshire, England. Her first victim was her 31-year-old lover, Lukas Slabaszewski, a Polish national with whom she bonded over a shared addiction to drugs and alcohol. On March the 29th, she killed her housemate, John Chapman, and her landlord, Kevin Lee. The latter, with whom Dennehy had also been intimate, was found clad in a black sequined dress with his buttocks exposed. At one point during the spree, after claiming another victim, Dennehy reportedly called a friend and sang the Britney Spears song, "Oops, I Did It Again," further attesting to the total lack of remorse she felt towards the killings. After the 3 murders, Dennehy went on the run with a man by the name of Gary Stretch. Criminal profilers would later argue that they were experiencing a folie à deux, a term for a shared psychosis that translated as madness of 2, in which the man was her subordinate and afraid of her. During her search for further victims, Dennehy posed for photos with a huge serrated knife and bragged that she and Stretch were like Bonnie and Clyde. Dennehy specifically targeted men and was reported to have told Stretch at one point, "I want my fun. I need you to get my fun." When Stretch drove her to Hereford, she randomly stabbed 2 dog walkers 9 minutes apart. The men, Robin Bereza and John Rogers, aged 64 and 56, respectively, both survived. Dennehy pleaded guilty to the murders and attempted murders. She was given a rare whole life order. Dennehy laughed and smirked as the sentencing judge described her as a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer. Psychiatrists subsequently diagnosed her with psychopathic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. Her behavior behind bars proved problematic for the prison system, which, by many accounts, struggled to contain her. In 2014, within 5 to 20 minutes of arriving at HMP Bronzefield in Surrey, Dennehy threatened to kill Rosemary West, who was housed at the same prison. The latter was a serial killer who'd claimed at least 10 victims alongside her husband, Fred. She and Dennehy were at the time the only women in the British prison system serving whole life orders. Dennehy reportedly issued the threat as a bid to become top dog at the prison, and there was no doubt that she would act on it. 64-year-old West was put into solitary confinement within minutes and then moved to another prison the next morning. Criminologist Christopher Berry D., author of Talking with Female Serial Killers, met both women. Berry D, a former Marine, said Dennehy was without doubt the most evil person I have ever met, adding I could smell evil coming off her. It's a smell like no other, so it's impossible to describe, but it's acrid and dirty. What made Dennehy particularly dangerous was her highly tuned ability to use intercourse to manipulate and control her victims. Dennehy was moved to HMP Low Newton in 2019 after she allegedly had an affair with a male prison officer. At one point, when Dennehy argued that being kept in isolation violated her human rights, the prison service presented as evidence a twisted escape plan that she'd once outlined in her diary. It involved killing a guard, cutting off their finger and using the amputated digit to fool the biometric system that activated locks in the prison. She also reportedly stashed a prison uniform in the laundry room and drew a detailed layout of the facility. Dennehy was said to have dismissed the plan as doodles in her diary, but it resulted in her being kept in isolation for at least 2 years. In October of 2023, a Chilean TikTok influencer known as the Narco Queen was gunned down in broad daylight. At the time of her killing, which was captured on video by a bystander, Sabrina Duran Montero was out on parole. She and 2 of her brothers had been arrested for supplying, distributing, and trafficking cannabis, cocaine, MDMA, and other substances earlier in 2023. 24-year-old Montero, a local drug trafficker, had amassed a following of more than 600,000 TikTok users, garnering a reputation as a narco influencer. On the day of her death, Montero was on her way to a nail salon in the Santiago town of Padre Hurtado, where she was approached by 3 men. In the eyewitness's cell phone footage, a masked gunman was shown approaching the young woman, who was already lying face down on the ground as the recording began. The assailant fired multiple rounds at Montero before absconding in her vehicle with his accomplices. Local law enforcement theorized that the broad daylight execution stemmed from some sort of conflict between rival gangs. As of the latest developments, no arrests had been made, nor any suspects identified. Number 6. Sheena Brandenburg. Michigan state troopers responded to the scene of what was believed to be a single vehicle crash in Crawford County during the early hours of August 1st of 2020. Upon arrival, police found 56-year-old Troy Lambert in critical condition. He was transported to Munson Hospital in Traverse City, where he eventually succumbed to his injuries. The victim crashed while riding his motorcycle. However, further analysis of the crime scene led investigators to determine that it hadn't been a single vehicle accident as initially believed. After Lambert departed from a local tavern earlier that night, he was struck from behind by a car, causing him to lose control of his bike and crash. Authorities were ultimately able to identify the motorist as 37-year-old Sheena Brandenburg from the city of Gaylord. The woman, a professional mixed martial artist fighter, had already left the state by the time she was identified by law enforcement. She was tracked to the city of Ellsbury, Missouri, where local police officers apprehended her. Brandenburg was subsequently extradited back to Michigan, where she faced charges of reckless driving causing death and failure to stop at the scene of an accident resulted in serious impairment or death. Her bond was set at $250,000. At the time, Brandenburg already had a documented criminal history, having been arrested for driving under the influence in 2010, 2012, and 2016. During the summer of 2021, she was found guilty at trial and sentenced to between 5 and 15 years behind bars for Lambert's death. Number 5. Ada Sim. A former female bodyguard from Hong Kong orchestrated a cold-blooded ambush attack on several of her relatives on June the 26th of 2018. 47-year-old Ada Sim, who was unemployed at the time of the incident, turned on her family following the death of her mother 3 years prior. According to court documents, Sim blamed her aunts and uncles for failing to take care of her mother before she succumbed to pneumonia in 2015. They'd reportedly sent her to an assisted living facility where she spent her final days. Sim also accused the family of trying to steal her mother's portion of the inheritance left behind by her grandmother. The day before the attack, Sim, who was critically depressed, allegedly smoked crystal meth. Then on June the 26th, she invited her aunts, uncles, and older brother to lunch at the Grace's restaurant near Quarry Bay Park. After the meal, Sim produced a firearm and fired multiple shots at her relatives. One of her aunts, 80-year-old Jim Su Fan, and one of her uncles, Chim Chung Ki, aged 62, were killed in the onslaught. Another one of Sim's aunts as well as an uncle was seriously wounded but fortunately survived. Meanwhile, Sim's brother managed to escape the scene unscathed. Following the shooting, the woman was detained by a security guard at City Plaza 4 in Tai-Koo Shing before being turned over to the police. Sim was completely remorseless in the aftermath of the attack. During her eventual trial in 2021, a defense team argued that she should be found guilty of manslaughter because of her mental impairment. However, after 10 days of court proceedings, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. After her punishment was announced, Sim stood up and stated, "I'm happy that I have avenged my mother." She also taunted the judge as she was leaving the courtroom, telling her, "You should die." Sim made headlines again in November when she tried to bribe the principal officer in charge of her prison ward, whom she offered $300,000. The officer declined and reported Sim to the proper authorities. As a consequence, the woman was sentenced to an additional 6 months. Number 4. Liv Morgan. On December the 14th of 2023, a sheriff's deputy in Sumter County, Florida, noticed a Jeep swerving in and out of the painted lines of the roadway. Upon pulling the vehicle over, the deputy reportedly detected the smell of marijuana. He also discovered a small plastic bag containing cannabis and a vape pen carrying an oil-like substance. The woman behind the wheel was identified as professional wrestler and former SmackDown Women's Champion Liv Morgan. The 29-year-old WWE star was arrested for possession of marijuana, not more than 20 grams, and drugs, possibly synthetic cannabinoids. She was bonded out of the Sumter County Jail after posting $3,000. In January of 2024, it was reported that Morgan had her felony count of possession of a synthetic cannabinoid dropped. She told investigators that while the bag of marijuana was hers, the vape pen containing the synthetic substance wasn't. Prosecutors agreed to drop the felony charge, but the wrestler's misdemeanor count of marijuana possession remained. Morgan was due back in court on February the 20th. Number 3. Marina Davis. During the summer of 2020, Michigan state troopers were dispatched to the parking lot of a restaurant in Grayling after receiving reports of a domestic dispute. They came upon a woman, 31-year-old Marina Davis, arguing with her boyfriend about whether or not she should get behind the wheel, as she'd reportedly been drinking. Troopers smelled alcohol on the woman's breath, so they asked her to perform sobriety tests. During the evaluation, Davis suddenly charged towards her boyfriend, who was sitting in a nearby vehicle. She rained blows down upon the man in clear view of the officers, who intervened and placed her in the back of a cruiser. Once there, Davis started kicking the inside of the car, breaking various items in the process. She subsequently tried shoving a trooper out of the doorway in order to attack her boyfriend again, but was restrained. Davis was then transported to Crawford County Jail. She was booked on 1 count of domestic violence and 1 count of obstructing and resisting police. Number 2. Viviane Obanov. In October of 2020, police were called to the home of Brazilian-born professional boxer Viviane Obanov in Interlaken, Switzerland. According to subsequent reports, the woman's 61-year-old husband, Thomas, whose full identity was protected under Swiss law, was clubbed to death with a baseball bat. The incident occurred only 6 days prior to Obanov's 34th birthday. The former boxer was arrested on suspicion of committing the brutal murder. She firmly denied the accusations upon being taken into custody and throughout the case's legal proceedings, which came to a head more than 2 years later. During the trial, prosecutors highlighted Obanov's checkered past in support of their case against her. After retiring from pro boxing in 2019, she relocated to Switzerland. She got married the following January, after which she started working in the food and beverage industry along with Thomas, a restaurateur. Prior to the latter's death, Obanov had been arrested for an unrelated domestic incident. She was also arrested for punching a man during her 30th birthday celebration at a London nightclub back in 2016. One of Obanov's ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of his own to further illustrate the woman's violent streak. According to the unnamed man, who was a weightlifter at the time of his relationship with Obanov, She attacked him during a drunken argument between the two. Although there were efforts to have her prosecuted for assault, the case was dropped shortly after the passing of her mother. In the end, the former fighter was found guilty of Thomas's killing and sentenced to 16 years in prison as punishment. Number 1. Christina Leon. During the early morning hours of September the 11th of 2022, a disturbance in the emergency room of Honor Health Scottsdale Osborne Medical Center in Arizona led to the arrest of an off-duty firefighter. 33-year-old Christina Leon, a member of the Phoenix Fire Department, was visiting a patient in the ER at about 1:30 a.m. She was asked to leave for being unruly and causing some sort of unspecified disturbance. Leon refused to comply, eventually drawing the attention of an off-duty Scottsdale police officer who was working security at the hospital. The officer approached the woman and issued multiple verbal warnings to vacate the premises, all of which were ignored. As Leon continued to make a scene, the officer tried to physically apprehend her, at which point she punched him in the face. Following a brief tussle, Leon was subdued and handcuffed. She was subsequently taken to the Maricopa County Jail, where she continued her disorderly behavior. She refused to identify herself to law enforcement, then kicked a detention officer in the leg multiple times according to court records. Leon was booked on 1 count of aggravated assault on an officer, 1 count of aggravated assault on a detention officer, criminal damage, and 3rd-degree criminal trespassing. Following Leon's arrest, the Phoenix Fire Department announced that they'd be conducting their own internal investigation into her actions. After serving less than half of a 53-month prison sentence for burglary, Florida man Justin Giambanco was granted early release in October of 2022. The 31-year-old, described as a career criminal, quickly resumed the patterns of behavior that led to him racking up over 20 felonies and misdemeanors on his criminal record before his 30th birthday. On April the 20th of 2023, the police in Palm Bay responded to a home on the 2700 block of Palm Drive Northeast, where they found a 69-year-old man dead. The victim's son had come upon his body strewn over a TV that had been thrown face down on the floor. His hands had been tied and bound with a USB cable, and he'd suffered a large laceration to the neck. Investigators found a blood-covered kitchen knife next to his body. Giambanco was linked to the violent crime after officers found a cell phone underneath the victim's body that reportedly belonged to the repeat offender. As Palm Bay authorities subsequently made efforts to locate Giambanco, they learned that he was already in the custody of Melbourne police in connection with an unrelated burglary. Upon searching the suspect's vehicle, law enforcement found a handgun of the same caliber as ammunition found at the Palm Drive crime scene, suggesting he and the victim had struggled over the firearm. There were also a pair of bloody sneakers which investigators believe were worn by Giambanco during the deadly home invasion. His resulting murder charge was added to the lengthy list of offenses he'd committed in the months following his early release from prison. On April the 15th, the woman he'd been staying with had kicked him out of the house, but he refused to leave. When the police got involved, Giambanco maintained his defiance, leading to an altercation with a Brevard County deputy. He was also implicated in several nearby burglaries. Giambanco faced a litany of new charges, including trespassing, battering a police officer, second-degree murder with a firearm, false imprisonment, grand theft with a firearm, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The Palm Bay police chief described the man as pure evil and also contended that his latest string of violent crimes wouldn't have transpired if he'd been required to serve out his entire prison sentence. Number 6. Michael Pent. A man known on the streets of Marion County, Florida as Zipperface, due to his distinctive facial tattoos, was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend in February of 2021. Sheriff's deputies had been dispatched to the Stage Top Motel, where they encountered the suspect, 21-year-old Michael Pent, as well as his partner of 2 months. The woman told law enforcement that she and Pent had been in the motel lobby when he asked to use her phone. She said they needed to go back to the room to charge the device first, at which point Pent flew into an unhinged rage. He began screaming and pushed his girlfriend, who subsequently fled into the parking lot. Pent pursued, then started shoving her around and striking her. The man admitted his misdeeds to law enforcement and was arrested on charges of battery and violation of probation. It was the latest in a long string of arrests for Pent, who'd last faced legal troubles in connection with a vehicle theft at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Ocala a few months earlier. He and an accomplice identified as 22-year-old Zachary Allen Hamel drove the stolen car to Oklawaha and parked it behind a residence in the 13,000 block of Highway 25. When the owner of the home saw the vehicle, he found it suspicious and contacted the police. After searching the property, officers found Hamel using the bathroom while Pent hid in the shower. They both faced grand theft auto charges following their subsequent arrest. Number 5. Lee Hazen Williamson. In September of 2012, a serial cross-dresser from California was arrested for baring his genitals to strangers, only a year after a similarly revealing incident on a county bus. Lee Hazen Williamson was the flasher identified in subsequent reports. The Austrian-born 57-year-old, whose occupation was listed as caregiver, was caught exposing himself while donning a floral top and bathing suit. The incident occurred at the dock of the Lakefront Chalet Motel in Lake County and was reported to the authorities by an eyewitness. Williamson was brought to the Lake County Jail and booked on a $50,000 bond. In May of the previous year, the man had allegedly boarded a county bus with a dress and wig on, then proceeded to expose himself to fellow passengers. He was ultimately convicted of indecent exposure in connection with the bus incident and was later detained again for failing to register as an offender. Number 4. Jennifer Carvajal. Early on April the 25th of 2021, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper clocked a Hyundai Elantra blazing down Interstate 4 in Tampa at speeds of up to 111 miles per hour. The officer, Sergeant Jason Moore, made a swift U-turn and gave chase with sirens blaring, eventually catching up to the speeding car near the exit to Mango Road. As he tried to overtake the vehicle, the young woman behind the wheel made a sudden, sharp right onto the road shoulder, sending the Elantra down the slope, then up an embankment. The vehicle subsequently struck a concrete light pole as well as a palm tree before overturning in the parking lot of a nearby car dealership. The accident sent 2 passengers hurtling from the Elantra's back seat, one of whom later died at the hospital. The only one of the car's 4 total occupants who'd been wearing a seat belt at the time of the crash was the driver, 24-year-old Jennifer Carvajal. She suffered only minor injuries, but at the hospital, officers noted her eyes were glassy, her words were slurred, and she had trouble staying awake. Medical tests confirmed that she was intoxicated with a blood alcohol level above the legal driving limit. Carvajal was arrested and charged with reckless driving involving a serious injury, DUI involving a serious injury, DUI manslaughter, driving without a license, and multiple counts of DUI property damage. After news of the deadly crash hit the airwaves, it emerged that Carvajal already had another DUI manslaughter conviction on her criminal record. A few weeks prior to her 17th birthday, in February of 2014, she'd driven her Lincoln Navigator straight through a red light before colliding with another vehicle, sending it careening into a pedestrian crossing sign. The other driver, 52-year-old Keith Allen Davis, lay bleeding and unconscious as Carvajal stumbled out of her wrecked Navigator and told a bystander, "I just got my learner's permit. I don't have insurance." Davis was eventually taken to Lakeland Regional Medical Center where he was pronounced dead. In Carvajal's vehicle, police found multiple empty cans of alcoholic drinks as well as an empty bottle of tequila. A few hours after the crash, her blood alcohol level tested above the legal limit. In the incident's wake, Carvajal pleaded no contest in adult court and was given a 5-year prison sentence to be followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to enroll in a residential treatment program. In connection with her second DUI, Carvajal contended that she hadn't in fact been the one driving, even though one of the other passengers identified her as such to Sergeant Moore at the scene. If convicted of her most recent charges, she could face a prison sentence of up to 40 years. Number 3. Cole Johnson. The police in Independence, Iowa, were called to the scene of a domestic dispute in the 800 block of 6th Avenue Southwest on April the 29th of 2023. Responding officers were told by neighbors that a woman had been going from house to house, knocking on front doors and asking residents for help. Law enforcement eventually tracked her down and discovered that she'd suffered apparent stab wounds, for which a neighbor had fixed a makeshift tourniquet to stem the bleeding. She was subsequently taken to a nearby hospital for treatment, but her injuries were reportedly deemed non-life-threatening. At the victim's residence, law enforcement came upon 29-year-old Cole Johnson, who was accused of inflicting the woman's injuries during a fight in the backyard. He was arrested on charges of willful injury causing bodily injury, first-degree harassment, and 3 counts of child endangerment. Johnson subsequently bonded out of jail, but found himself back in trouble with the law within a couple of weeks. On May the 10th of 2023, Independence police were called to the 300 block of 4th Street Southeast for a report of a family disturbance. Upon arrival, they encountered an uncooperative male suspect who was identified as Johnson. He threatened the officers with a knife and ultimately needed to be tased in order to be subdued and taken back into custody. The man consequently faced additional charges of assault against a peace officer with a dangerous weapon, domestic abuse assault, and interference with official acts. Number 2. Andres Quintana Martinez. Officers from the Anderson Police Department in California were called to a local business on February the 9th of 2023 after receiving reports of a man rolling around on the floor and shouting incoherently. The individual was identified as 40-year-old Andres Quintana Martinez, a habitual criminal offender who was already well known to Anderson law enforcement. In subsequent reports, it was detailed how Martinez had been arrested 20 times within the span of half a year for various crimes, including violent and drug-related offenses. For his latest documented incident, the man was charged with public intoxication, but in the preceding 6 months, he'd also faced charges of resisting a peace officer, prowling, and felony obstruction of a peace officer, among others. Despite his lengthy rap sheet, Martinez was released from the Shasta County Jail the day after his most recent arrest. Anderson police subsequently released a statement addressing the concerns of local residents about repeat criminals such as Martinez being allowed back on the streets. They revealed that the Shasta County Jail had been forced to close an entire floor due to severe staff shortages, which led to a number of chronic offenders being released from custody. Number 1. Tyrone Howard. The NYPD received reports of shots fired near a public housing development in East Harlem on the night of October the 21st of 2015. Officer Randolph Holder and his partner arrived at the scene at around 8:30 p.m., whereupon they spoke with a man who said that his bicycle had been stolen at gunpoint. The victim revealed that following the theft, the suspect had fled with a group of people along a footpath near the East River. An individual with a bike was subsequently located on a pedestrian overpass near the highway. When officers engaged the male suspect, he pulled out a firearm and started shooting. 33-year-old Holder was struck in the head with a bullet during the ensuing gunfight, after which the thief abandoned the bike and fled on foot. Having been shot in the leg, the suspect only made it a few blocks before he was caught and taken into police custody. Following a brief stint at the hospital, the man, identified as 30-year-old Tyrone Howard, was booked on murder, robbery, and weapons charges. Howard had reportedly been arrested a total of 28 times since he was 13, including for drug possession and robbery, and consequently had 2 previous stints in state prison. For Officer Holder's slaying, the career criminal, known on the streets as Peanut, was found guilty on all counts by a Manhattan jury. In April of 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8. Dana Johnson and Kiana Wilson. On December the 19th of 2018, Michigan women Dana Johnson and Kiana Wilson, aged 18 and 40 respectively, were stopped by loss prevention officers at a Target in Bloomfield Township. The duo had tried to walk away with a shopping cart containing roughly $1,900 in unpaid electronics, even though the store was filled with police officers at the time. The Bloomfield Township Police Department, along with Sylvan Lake, Kego Harbor, and Orchard Lake Police Departments, hosted a Shop with a Cop event. Over a dozen members of law enforcement were at the scene, helping underprivileged children choose gifts for their families. Johnson and Wilson had tried to pull the ill-fated theft only feet away from them. Predictably, security personnel asked for police support and the two women were arrested on felony retail fraud charges. The Kigo Harbor Police Department posted about the incident on its Facebook, adding a tongue-in-cheek comment that a special episode of Dumb Criminal Minds was likely being filmed live in the store. Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend 24 hours locked up in a cell with a cannibal or go on a date with a serial killer? Let us know in the comments section below.